I can't imagine having a firewall without having an extensive logging option because it doesn't really make any sense. A firewall is by its very nature the sort of program that screams, log everything you can just in case we have some problems. Now, logging information, it gives us hard evidence of problems that we may be experiencing on our ISA server, possible intrusion attempts being made against our network, the ability to track what our employees are up to, being able to justify to management why we need a bigger, faster server, and many more things. So it's important that we capture this sort of information as it will come in handy later on. So in this video, we'll be taking a look at the logging capabilities of ISA Server 2006. We'll also see how we can configure ISA Server to send us an alert when something happens that we really should know about. Then we'll see how we can configure logging and produce reports from our captured data, and we'll see how we can monitor ISA Server itself to ensure that our system is running smoothly. So in our ISA Management Console, we'll come over here to the left-hand side of our console. We'll click on the Monitoring link. And this is a place, of course, that we have come to a couple of times throughout the course of these videos. Now let's just move this task pane out of the way so we've got a little bit more room here to work with. Alright, now in the middle of our screen here, we're presented with the default tab, the Dashboard tab, which shows us the monitoring dashboard, and this gives us a bird's eye view of what's going on with our ISA server without having to go and click through any of these other tabs. So as you can see, we've got connectivity and we have alerts and services and so on, and up here in our tab you'll see we've got alerts, we've got services, we've got connectivity and so forth. And with any of these sections, they can be collapsed if you like by simply clicking on this little arrow icon in the top right corner. Okay, so firstly we've got connectivity verifiers, and this here shows us at a glance what connections are up and being monitored by ISA Server. And if you haven't seen it yet, we do have a separate video about how we can go about configuring these connectivity verifiers. Now on the right hand side we have alerts, and this lets us see what events have occurred on our server, such as any errors, as well as events like services starting and other informational events. Now we could also see here ISA Server's services, whether they're started or not. We can see the sessions that are currently in use on our ISA server, and you can see here if any firewall clients are currently connected to our ISA server. Now we have another section here. Let's just move this so we can see it a little bit better. All right, here for reports that we've previously generated, and of course right down the very bottom we can see at a quick glance here the system performance of our ISA server, and of course that's also useful. Now each of these dashboard sections you see here has a little icon here in the top left on the title bar, and that's going to show us the most severe event in each of these categories. So we can see we've got a lot of green icons here indicating that everything's okay. But over here for our alerts we've also got an informational icon which shows us that the most severe event we've currently got is an informational one. Alright, well, since this dashboard is simply just a bird's eye view, if you like, as to what's going on in each of these other tabs, let's move on and take a closer look at each of them. So our first tab here is the Alerts tab, and here you can see any events that have occurred on our ISA server. And these will consist of any informational events, which you can see we've got 2 now, any warnings and any errors, and we can configure custom alerts to notify us when certain conditions occur on our ISA server, and I'll show you how to do that later on in this video. So in our alerts tab here we've got 5 columns. We can see the alert itself, we can see the most recent time this alert has happened, so if this is an ongoing problem that's occurred many times, this will show you the most recent one. The status, which we can see here for these alerts, is a new alert, and the category under which this alert falls, or in other words, what area of the ISA server has generated this alert, and then which server. Now if we select any of these alerts here, and we'll expand it, because with these ones you can see we have had multiple occurrences. Now down the bottom here we can see a description of the event in this alert information window, and often down in this section you're going to get a more detailed look at the actual error, or perhaps what ISA server has done to attempt to rectify the problem. So since this is just an informational event, we're really not going to see anything with this one here. Now if we do right click on any of these alerts, we can also acknowledge them, and choosing acknowledge will change the status to acknowledged, as you can see it's just done here. That way our other administrators will know that someone's looking into the problem, or is at least aware of it. And if the problem is no longer an issue, we could right click on it, we can choose to reset it, and then if we click yes, we're going to get rid of it entirely from our log. Now we can also right click up the top here for our columns, and we can add in a couple of other columns such as the severity and the count. And I like to see this count column because you'll see what it will tell you is how many times this alert has been triggered. And personally I like to see the count column because for recurring problems it's going to show you how long this problem's been here for. Now let's expand our tasks pane again, because over here in our task pane we've got another option here to configure our alert definitions. And this is going to show us all of the alerts that come pre-configured within ISAServer and what category or severity they fall under. So at the top here we can see that an alert action failure is listed as an error, and we have a cache container initialization error. Those will be logged as a warning, and so on. Now any of these checked boxes that you see down here, they will generate an alert, but by default the alert won't actually go and alert anyone unless they come here into the ISAServer Management Console to view them on the Alerts tab. But if we select one of these, let's say an intrusion detected event, let's say that I want to be notified if someone is attempting to get into my ISAServer or to bring it down with a known attack. So we'll select this, we'll click the Edit button, and here we'll get a name and a description of the alert. The category is a security event, but we could certainly change that if we like, and we can see it's currently set to a warning. Again, something we can change. Now finally at the bottom you'll see here that this event is enabled, and on the Events tab, the event is an intrusion, although we could change this to a specific type of intrusion if we liked. And you'll note it's set to trigger against any server, any ISAServer that we might have inside our array. Now we can set how many times we'll allow this intrusion to occur before we want it to alert us, or how many events per second before we want to be told about it. And since both of these boxes here are not checked, the default is to log them immediately as they happen. But you could change this default behavior by checking these two boxes and then entering in the number of events or events per second if you prefer to be notified if it occurs more than once. Now down the bottom here, for every subsequent time that these thresholds above here are met, we can trigger our alerts either immediately, only after an alert was manually reset, or after 1 minute, which of course you can see is the default. And now on the Actions tab, this is where we can specify what we're going to do. Well, by default you can see here that we're pretty much going to do nothing except for to write an event to the Windows event log. But with only about 10 seconds of configuration, we could choose to send an email to an administrator to let them know that this alert has been triggered, and it's as simple as entering in these fields here, your email server, who you want to send the email from, who you want to send the email to, and anyone that's used email before is instantly going to recognize these fields. Now we could also choose to run a program or a script when this event occurs. Now of course we're already going to trigger a record in the Windows event log, but we can also choose to stop or start services as well. Now if you don't want to change any of these default alerts, you can click the Add button, and this will start up a new wizard where we can simply create our own. So let's just use our intrusion example as before. So I'm going to give mine a name of Land Attack. We'll click Next. For the event here, you can see we've got quite a lot to choose from. I'll choose Intrusion Detected, and under the actual condition, we'll choose a land attack. We'll click Next. Now for this alert, can it be triggered by any server or just a specific one? We'll leave it at any server. We'll click Next. And here we can select which category this event falls under, and it defaults to a security event, and that's fine for this example, but we could choose any of these other categories if we like. We've got cache, routing, firewall service, network load balancing, and other. And we can see that our severity defaults to error. Again, that's fine, but we could downgrade this to a warning or an informational event if we like. We'll leave those defaults as they are. We'll click Next. And now when we arrive at this condition, we want to do something. So what is our action going to be? Now do note that you can choose more than one action if you like, but at the very least we will need to define one, because if we just click next here, you'll see that we get an error. So we can choose to send an email, run a program, report the event to the Windows event log, or we could just start and stop the ISA services. So I'll just say, let's just write this to the Windows event log. We'll click next and we'll click finish. And if we scroll down to, what do we call it, the L's, here we're able to see our new land attack alert that we've configured. And to have it live on our server, we'll simply click OK. And then we'll need to apply our changes. And now we'll be notified using the actions we've specified if someone attempts a land attack on our network. Okay, so moving on, the next tab we have here is the Sessions tab. And this will show us who's currently connected to the ISA server. We can see things like when they connected, what server they're connecting to, the type of connection they're using, whether that be a secure net connection, a firewall client, or a web proxy client. We can see the IP address that the client has, the network that they're coming from, as well as things like their username and, of course, the host name. And if we right-click on these columns here, we can also choose to show the application that's using this session as well. Now, if you are feeling a little bit power hungry, you could also right-click on an entry and you can choose to disconnect a user's session. Now, this is actually a rather useful feature, not so much because you're able to annoy your users, but if you notice that something's going on that shouldn't be, such as an intrusion attempt, or even a user who's simply going to places he or she shouldn't be going, then you can just disconnect their session, and all connections associated with this session would then be closed. Now, that won't stop a user from opening up that same connection again. You'll need to configure your firewall rules to prevent that from happening, but this will terminate their connection immediately. So that's a good spot to be aware of. Okay, well, our next tab is the Services tab, and as you'd probably expect, this shows us the ISA server services and the status of each of them. Now, since all of my services here are obviously running, if we right-click on any of them, we'll have the ability to stop them, but we only have the option of stopping them. But if you do have any services in this list that are currently stopped and you right-click, you'll have the option of starting them as well. Next tab is the Configuration tab, and this will show us the configuration version of each ISA server in our array, so we can ensure that it's up to date. So everything's good here, there's really nothing to do. We'll move on to the next tab, which is the Reports tab. And by default, we don't have any reports configured. So if we come over here to our Tasks pane again, we could choose to generate a new report, or we could create and configure report jobs. Now the difference between these two is that the Generate option lets us run a report right now, whereas the Create and Configure Report Jobs option, this lets us set up a schedule and run reports automatically whenever you want. So if you have a report that you want to run at the end of each week, you'd use the Report Job option. All right, well, let's run a quick report now. So we'll click on Generate a New Report, and this will start up a wizard. So we'll need to give our report a name. Let's just call this one Test for the sake of the argument. We'll click Next. We can then choose what type of content we want to include in this report, and I'll leave all of these checked here, as they're all rather self-explanatory. Although if you are sending this report to the management, they'd probably be more interested in just seeing the summary at the top rather than all of this information. Either way, select what you need to see in the report and click Next. Now here we can select a date range where we'd like the data to come from. Now this defaults to showing today's date, but if you want to go back further than that, we'll just simply click on the Start Date box and we'll go back, say, a week in time, and then we'll click Next. Now, if you like, you can choose to publish these reports to a directory or a network share. So we'll check this box and we'll click on the Browse button here, and I'm just going to go to one of my disks. We'll go to my D drive and we'll click the Make New Folder button, and I'll create a new folder which I'll just call Reports. We'll click OK. And we're going to use this folder here to store our reports. Now, if this reports folder here does require us to use a different account that has permissions required to be able to write into that folder, we could check this box here and then click on the Set Account button and then enter in a different user account that does have permissions to be able to write to this folder. Alright, well, we'll click Next. And the final step here is to decide if we want to email somebody a notification message that will tell them that our report has been generated. So we'd simply check this box, we'd enter in all the details of our email server, and we'll fill in who the email is going to be sent from, sent to, and down the bottom we can include a link to the actual report itself so that the person we're sending this email to will have a link in it that says the report's ready. They can click that link and go straight to the report that's in our reports folder on this server without having to manually go and locate it. Alright, well, I'm going to uncheck this box. I don't need it. We won't bother about sending an email. We'll just click Next and then Finish. Okay, well, our report is now being generated. So if we click on this Refresh Now link, and here you can see that the status column has changed to show that the report is being built. Now this will take a few moments to run, so I'm going to pause the video here and we'll come back once it's complete. Alright, well, our report has run. The status has now changed to say it's complete, and it will now be saved into our reports directory. So now we could right click on our report here and we could choose to view it. And of course we could also go to the directory where we saved it and run it from there. Now we can choose to publish the report, which is just a fancy way of saying copy the report to another directory. We can delete it, and we can also run this report again to refresh it. So we'll click View, and this will open up our report here, our HTML report in Internet Explorer. Now you can either scroll down this entire report here and you can see that it is a rather long one, or you can simply click on these hyperlinks down the left hand side and they'll take you straight to that spot in the report, which is a far better option in my opinion than running through it trying to find what you're looking for. Alright, so looking at our links here on the left, we can view the summary information for the top protocols being used in our ISA server, and this will show you this graph here in the middle of the page listing the top protocols that are being used in our network, and a lot of these of course you're going to instantly recognize. We have the summary report for the top users, so these were the guys using the most of our network traffic, and this report will show us which users were the most active. Now this report isn't singling out web traffic, by the way. This is showing all network traffic summarized into the one graph. So next we've got the top websites that people have been visiting, and this is a useful graph to look at, not just so you know which sites people are accessing frequently. Although if you are seeing things like YouTube top the charts for bandwidth during the day, you'd probably be a little bit concerned. But I like this graph, not only for that reason, but it also lets me understand which sites I probably should be actively caching. Because if I have a lot of my users hitting these same sites and they're downloading a lot of data, why not cache it and save some money and make it a bit faster? Alright, well next we've got cache performance, and this graph shows us the objects that were returned from the cache. And obviously since in this lab we haven't had too much in the way of network activity, you can see that we haven't had a lot of information delivered from the cache. But trust me, pop this into a production network for a day and you would be seeing a rather different graph, with a lot of the information being delivered from the cache and obviously saving you a lot of time and bandwidth. Right, well next we've got a traffic graph here, and this shows us the daily network traffic for all of our protocols so we can see where our peaks and our troughs are. Now I like this graph as well because it can be useful to know when the busy days are, so you can schedule to perform bandwidth intensive tasks when the network is least likely to be affected. And knowing exactly when the slow days are, well, that can really help you out. Now finally we've got a daily traffic summary report. Now this doesn't necessarily show you each day. Remember, I chose to run a report showing me the data from the entire last week. So instead, this report shows you an average of all of the days in the report, and like with our traffic graph report, this can also be useful to gain an understanding of your traffic usage, as it will compensate for days where you had unexpected high use of bandwidth, and it will show you on average what you're using each day. Now I like this as it really does give you a look at your typical peak times, and you'll definitely be able to use this to tell when your best times of your day are for deploying patches and doing backups and things like that. Now, I'm not going to go through all of these other report sections as they're all rather self-explanatory, but you're likely to want to know which users are using the most bandwidth by visiting websites, so you'll probably find the top web users report to be rather useful. Anyway, we'll minimize our report here for now, as I want to talk about how we can customize these reports. So over here, in the right-hand side in our task pane, if you scroll down to the bottom here, you can see that we've got a whole bunch of different customizations that we can do for each category of our reports. So at the top here, we can customize our summary content, our web usage, our application usage, traffic, and security. And if we have a look at our report again just quickly, you'll notice that we've got these same headings down the left-hand side: summary, web usage, application usage, traffic, and security. So let's take a quick look here at, say, the top one, summary content. And you can see that by default, our summary content report will show up to 15 protocols in the list, and you can increase or decrease that if you like. Our top users tab is also going to show us the top 15 users of traffic, and it will sort this by the total number of bytes. But we could change this to the total number of requests or just bytes in or out if we like. Now the top sites tab again is also going to include by default the top 15 websites, again sorted by total bytes. And finally, our cache hit ratio tab, this will show us the number of cache hits we had, either by bytes or by total number of requests. Now the other options we have here are for our web usage, application usage, traffic, and so on. These are exactly the same sort of windows as we just looked at for the summary content, where we can specify the number of items we want to see in the report and how we want that data to be shown. And that's all there really is to creating a report and customizing it the way you want. It's so easy, in fact, that there's really little excuse for not knowing what's going on. So I'd encourage you to take a closer look at these reports, and you'll likely find that they'll tell you a lot about your data and where it's going. So back to our tabs here, the next tab we have is the Connectivity Verifiers tab, and what this tab does is allow you to monitor the connectivity status between the ISA server and another server, or in other words, check to see if your ISA server can in fact communicate with the server you wish to monitor. Now we're not going to go through this now because we'll be doing that later in another separate video, so I'd recommend that you check that video out later on. So our next tab here is the logging tab, and at the top part of this window here, it's all ready to launch the included default query, which is designed to show us our connections that we currently have to our ISA server right now, and we can simply click on Start Query, and in real time it's going to show us what's happening on our ISA server. And this is really useful as it can help not only track what's going on and who in your company's trying to do what, but it's a great source for troubleshooting as well. So imagine that you've just configured your ISA server to block access to YouTube, and you test it and you can still get out to the site. Or maybe you've allowed access to YouTube and you can't get there. Well, you can come in here and you'll be able to see why the rule did or it didn't work. So running through this, we can see the time our event was logged. We can see the client IP, where the connection has come from, and where it's going here in the destination IP column. We can see the port, the protocol, what the action was, so did we allow that request or did we deny it? And we'll also be able to see any particular rule that we've created that blocked or allowed the connection. We see our results, any HTTP status codes, the client username that issued any request, the source and destination networks, any URL that might have been involved, the server name, and so forth. Now, if that's not enough information for you, if we do right-click up here and choose Add Remove Columns, you can see here that there is a whole bunch of other columns that you can choose from, so chances are you're going to find exactly what you need right there. Now over here on the right-hand side in the task pane again, we can choose to edit the filter. And what this allows you to do is to set what results the ISA server is going to show you in the entire logging tab. Now by default here, our log settings are set to live, which means that when we run this query, you'll see what we saw a moment ago, and that's the live result happening on our server right now. But you could use this feature to perform a historical search as well. So if we select our log time entry here, down the bottom, we'll change this condition, which is currently set to live, and we could change it to, say, the last 7 days. Now, if you wanted to go back further than 7 days, you could use the on or after or on or before settings and then choose a particular date. All right, so let's set this back, say 7 days, and we'll click on the update button, and we can see here that our entry has now changed. So let's further configure this. Let's say we want to check up on a particular user. Say management comes to us and they suspect that one of our users isn't doing the right thing, and they've asked us for a list of the websites that this person's visiting. So we'll select this filter by drop-down box, and we can search from any of these fields, and as you'd see, there are a lot of them. So to be able to track our user, we could use something like the client username, which of course would be rather logical, so we'll select that. For the condition, we'll say equals, and for the value, we'll enter in Jorkus/administrator. Now we'll click Add to List, which populates that up there, and of course now we can click Start Query. Now this could take a little while to run depending on how much data you have and how far back you want to search. Now the real damning factor here is that this log can provide hard evidence of the sites that your users have visited and the things they've done. So if it comes to it and management requires this hard evidence of a user's activities, you'll be able to deliver it. Now over here on the right hand side in our task pane, we can also configure firewall logging options, and by default you'll note here that ISA is set to use MSDE database as its log file format. However, if you don't want to use the MSDE database, you could choose to log to a SQL database or a text file using either the W3C extended log file format or ISA server's own standard format. Now finally at the bottom you can see that logging is enabled, and you can disable it by unchecking this box, although I must admit that's something I really wouldn't want to do. Now by default of course we are using MSDE, and if we click the options button here, you'll note that the default here is for our logs to be stored in the ISA server installation folder, which is in a folder called ISA logs, but you could specify an alternative path here if you like, and personally I like to do that. I like to write them out to a different hard drive if possible. That way, if our ISA server dies, we don't lose the logs, which we like to keep normally for historical purposes. But also your corporate policy might require retention of those logs for a certain period of time, and in fact it certainly will in most cases. Now here we can see that the total size of the log files is set to 8 gig. And what will happen here is that a log file will only ever grow to a maximum of 2 gig, and then a new file will be created. So we'll only ever see a maximum of 4 log files if we leave this setting here at 8 gig, but only as long as there's at least 512 meg free on the drive where we're storing our logs. So if we've used 7 gig for our logs, but the total free drive space is less than 512 meg, then we're going to start overriding our logs and we'll never reach this value here of 8 gig. But if we've got the disk space available, we're going to keep writing to our logs until we reach this value here, which is 8 gig in this case. Now you'll also see that we can delete, or we will be deleting, old log files as we need to free up space, and we're going to delete files that are older than 7 days. Now finally down the bottom here you'll note we have the option to compress the logs if you want, and this option is grayed out for me because I'm using the default log file path, but it will become available if you choose to save your logs to a separate NTFS partition. Now these are the defaults, and of course you can change them if you like. Ultimately, if you decide to change these, it's going to come down to 2 things. Firstly, how much hard disk space you have spare for your logs, and how far back you'd like to be able to search your logs. So if your corporate policy requires you to have to search back for the last 3 months, then you'll want to set this option here at the bottom to at least 90 days, and I'd suggest you choose either to not limit the size of your logs, or you'd want to set this to a rather high value just to be sure that they're not overwritten. Now on the Fields tab you can choose which fields here you'd like to capture in your logging, so have a look through this list and check the ones that you'd like to see in your log. Okay, over on the right, our next option we have here is to configure our web proxy logging, and you'll note that this screen is exactly the same as our firewall logging one. So we'll skip this. There's no point wasting your time by you having to watch me go through the exact same screen again. Alright, well at the top, our final tab here is the Change Tracking tab, and here we'll be able to view a history of who's been making changes on our ISA server. Now this feature isn't turned on by default, so we will need to click this link here to configure Change Tracking, and then we'll need to enable it by checking this box. So what this does, and it's a pretty simple thing really, is log any changes made to ISA server, and if you leave these default settings, it'll be up to 1,000 entries that can be displayed in this console, along with a description of the change that was made. So let's click OK here, and once we click Apply, it's going to ask us now for a description, a little like the shutdown event tracker does when we shut down or restart Windows Server. So we'll just say we've applied the Change Tracking feature, and we'll click Apply. Alright, and now when we refresh our Change Tracking tab here, we've now got an entry recording our change. So this is complete here with the details of who made this change, and if we expand this entry, we can also see exactly what they did. So we've got a really nice method here of tracking what people are doing on our ISA server. In this video, we've seen the logging and monitoring options that ISA Server 2006 provides you with, and I'm sure you'll all agree that there are a lot of them. Now remember that by default, ISA Server won't email you when something happens on your server that you probably would want to know about. It's not going to run a script, and it won't highlight anything to you. The only thing it'll do is write to the Windows event log, and it will display an entry up here in our alerts section. So you might want to think about how you want to handle these events. So I'd encourage you to open up the ISA console, click on the Logging tab, and set how long you want to retain your logs and the amount of disk space you'll allow them to use, and then start configuring how you wish to be alerted when certain events occur. Now if you take the time to set this up properly, ISA Server will tell you everything that you want to know about who's doing what on your network, and having that sort of information readily available is, for obvious reasons, extremely useful. So we hope you've enjoyed this video, and would like to thank you for watching.